Hi, kia ora, and welcome to Creative Connections, where we have beautiful, inspiring conversations with artists living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. Carol Bucknell is a Waiheke artist who has come from a successful career in journalism and garden design. She's been painting commissioned portraits and figurative works in oils for 20 years, and she now produces more abstracted figurative works using oils and cold wax. In January 2024, Carol and artist Sally Tagg held a joint exhibition at Waiheke Community Art Gallery. Later that year, she was a finalist in the Walker and Hall Art Awards, and then in January 2026, she won the runner-up prize at the Craig's Aspiring Art Awards in Wanaka. Carol has completed several specialist courses focusing on painting the figure in order to broaden a mostly self-taught practice. Working out of her Oneroa studio in Waiheke, her paintings explore the relationship between contemporary digital processes and oil paint application on panels using cold wax medium. Through the use of bold colour, texture, stencils and other media, the resulting paintings take the figure beyond its traditional boundaries, while retaining the artist's obvious affection for the human form. In this really lovely chat, we talk about Carol's journey from painting portraits to abstracted figurative works. We talk about the cold wax process, abstracting the figure, how she captures movement, her fascination with gesture, human poses and body language, inspiration for her paintings, and why she likes to paint women. She also talks about the Procreate app in her process and how she uses that, the possibility of using text in her paintings at some point, and the influence of a career in journalism and landscape design in her work, and so much more. This is such a great episode. I know you'll love it as much as I loved meeting and talking to Carol. Thank you, ngā mihi to Carol Bucknell, for joining us on the podcast and for sharing your story. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, Mandy.
It's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
We've had such a wonderful chat. We're like, okay, we better get recording because, we've got work to do. But it's so nice to have a chat and to meet you. So thank you for coming on Creative Connections.
My pleasure.
So let's start from the beginning, as we like to do. Can you tell us where you were born and what sort of child you were?
I was born in Finalist, which is still an Air Force base. My dad was in the Air Force, and I was one of 5 children, the middle child. And we lived there till I was about 11. Then my parents divorced, and as we had been living in an Air Force house, Mum didn't have a house to live in, so she had to get a state house, and we moved to the other side of Auckland, to Otara, which was a new housing development in those days. This was probably in the 60s. And that was a bit of a culture shock, as you can imagine. But my sister and I, particularly Kate, the young one from me, she and I loved the whole Pacifica Māori culture. So we joined the Polynesian Club and we had a ball. We really enjoyed our time in Otara. I mean, it was tough, but we still really just enjoyed the Polynesian Club, travelled all over the place. We learnt so much about the culture and we loved the parties. And then from there I was encouraged by an English teacher who said that I could write well, that perhaps I should think about journalism as a career. And I thought that sounds better than nursing or being a secretary. So at the time, I don't know if there was a journalist course, so I enrolled in a BA at Auckland University and did that over sort of 4 or 5 years, part-time mostly.
Mm.
And
sorry, just to interrupt, were you actually studying art at high school?
No, and when I was at high school, there was streams, and so there was like the commercial stream, so people did typing and all that sort of stuff, and then there was the academic stream. But anyone who wanted to do art, somehow that didn't fit into the academic stream, and so I was told that I should study French, English, science, history, all those sorts of subjects. So I did, as I was told, Latin even. I was quite good at Latin. And but I used to love to draw as a kid. Dad had left this old paint set in the house after he left, and I used to play with that and do little paintings with it and used to draw people. Really enjoyed it, but it kind of, university took over, etc., etc. So it sort of went on the back burner for quite a long period.
It's such a shame, isn't it? And in those days, that sort of
Yes.
attitude that you're either academic or you're arty, and it was sort of more frowned on the arty side more than the academic.
Well,
Yeah.
you can't get a good job as an artist, can you? That was the attitude. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I must admit it did. And my sister did art, and she's a good painter. And she ended up having photos. She went to Penrose High, which is now Mount One Tree Hill, and her paintings are still in their school hall alongside their collection, which is this incredible collection.
Really?
Yeah, but she doesn't
Amazing.
paint now, and I do. So
Mm,
interesting how things turn out. Maybe
that's
I was discovering the child in me.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? Oh, well, yeah. So you ended up studying journalism and then sort of became a journalist more in the garden design kind of home and garden space. Is that right?
Well, initially, because by this time, after I finished my degree, I travelled immediately and lived in Sydney for a year. Then ended up in London. And after travelling and temping and all that, I decided I wanted a serious career. And the words of that sixth form English teacher were in the back of my brain. So I ended up on a magazine called the Architect's Journal, which was a highly regarded weekly architectural magazine. And I learned my trade basically on the tools, as it were, as an assistant to one of the editors there, and he was generous enough to let me start writing little snippets for the magazine. And I loved it, and it was such a crazy place. It was cool. It was full of art and architectural drawings and artifacts and a row of old Georgian buildings. And the editor was a lovely, lovely man, and I learned such a lot. So
Mhm.
when I came out to New Zealand, that was in the mid-'80s, I was offered the job of editor of Architecture New Zealand. It had just been launched, and it was way above my pay grade, but I said, yes, yes, I'll do it.
Amazing.
So I did it for about 3 or 4 years, and then started freelancing. And then, as I was mostly writing about houses and design, a friend suggested I'd write a column for a magazine she was editing. That was Home and Building, as it used to be called. And she needed a garden writer. So the garden writing just sort of developed from there. I was ending up doing columns for Next, Home, Your Home and Garden. I started writing for New Zealand Gardener, even did a column for the Herald for a bit. So, yeah, I suddenly became this gardening guru, they called me. It's like, I felt like
That's
an
amazing.
imposter.
And was it more coming from the fact that you could write? It wasn't necessarily your thing. Did it become your thing as you wrote more about it?
I'd always been a keen gardener, and all my family are keen gardeners. So I did know a reasonable amount about it. And, as a journalist, we just research when we don't know enough. And so
Yeah.
so I think it was the combo that I knew enough and that I could write, because there's lots of gardeners who can't write. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
That's
So,
so
yeah,
good. How
it was a great
amazing.
job. I loved it. Yeah. And I did a couple of books with the photographer that I worked with mostly, Sally Tagg. And Sally and I worked together for about 20 or 30 years. We did a book on contemporary New Zealand gardens and another one on small gardens, which did quite well. So that was fun. Hard
That
work.
is yeah, and what an incredible career. Like you did so well, but it must have been something you were so passionate about.
I was, and I still am. I mean, where I live now, I designed the garden, and I spend, when we first installed the garden from a bare piece of land, hours and hours out there creating my masterpiece, which now is great. It's done everything that I hoped it would, So
Yeah,
that's been
that's so
wonderful
good. And
to do.
it's a nice kind of full stop to your garden writing career in a way, is creating your own garden.
Yes, yeah, you could say
Yeah,
that actually. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
well, COVID sort of put a full stop to it, because by then we had moved to Waiheke, where I live now, and suddenly Bauer Media, which owned all the most magazines that I was freelancing for, just closed the company down. They were a German company, and so Bauer owned like Next, North and South, Metro, Listener, Your Home and Garden, that I was the gardens editor for, and several others. And they sort of dispersed. Some people bought some of them are still going, but for a period there was no work. And at that point I thought, actually, I'm here on Waiheke. That was why one of the things that sort of inspired me about moving to Waiheke was the artistic community here. I'm just going to paint. So that's my painting career started then, my third career, really.
Yes, isn't that great? And you had been painting for quite a while alongside your career, hadn't you? You
Yes.
didn't stop that.
No, I started painting actually when the kids were little. Started doing some paintings of my daughters. I've always loved portraits and figures and that sort of art. And I started doing portraits of other friends' children, so friends and family, and gradually I drifted into doing more figurative work. Well, I love portraits, but I wanted something more freeing, more loose. And I just love the figure and how the figure can tell you so many things about a person. And it could be a person from the back, and you could still tell who that person is. And I love trying to sort of reveal that and tell a story just by the figure. So that's kind of where I drifted, which is where I mainly focus now is on the figure.
Yeah.
Not the face so much.
Yes, it's really interesting that we can get into that later. So your paintings are very distinctively yours, I feel like you've got quite a strong style that is really beautifully connected. And through color as well as form and subject, I suppose.
Yeah, I
Um,
must colour just I can't stop myself. I try and get into more neutrals, but the colours always just seep in.
yes, well, I love that. You know, that's you. That's part of you. It's
Well, I
probably
read
been,
something about that recently, and it said if you if that's what you're drawn to, and you keep wanting to do that, don't try and force yourself into another direction. And now I'm trying to embrace my love of colour and just thinking that's who I am, and
yeah,
it sort of distinguishes my work from others.
yes,
Not
absolutely.
everyone loves it, of course. Not everyone wants a big bold figure on their walls, but
That's okay.
that's beside the point. Yeah, in my
Yeah,
view.
exactly. You're doing it for you. And then
Exactly.
I love the way a lot of your paintings have got that sort of garden influence as well.
Yes, that's something I've started to introduce because I thought, well, I'm passionate about it, and I've got quite crazy about using stencils in my work. I love that layered look, and I've found this wonderful company in America called Stencil Girl, and they have these gorgeous botanical stencils. So I mean, you can see a painting behind me. That's my niece Rita, and she's in the winter gardens. And I just put as many plants and plant-related sort of things in and around her because I wanted her to be surrounded by all these plants. And I actually won. I was in the finals for the Walk and Hall Garden Award a couple of years ago, and that was one of my first garden related ones. And I happened to have been on a garden safari, which we have on Waiheke every 2 years, I think it is, the Jazzy Dean. And I'd taken a shot of some people wandering through, and I turned it into a painting with a pink sky and crazy plants. And I was so thrilled when it was selected as a finalist. And yeah, I still have people admiring that painting. And I thought, yes, I'm going to go because I'd done a lot of beach related work, but now I thought, no, I'm going to throw some more garden stuff in there because
Yeah, absolutely. I just love
yeah,
that. And yeah, you've done well with your awards. You just recently you got the award for the runner-up award for the Craig's Aspiring Art Prize,
yes, that
which
was
is
so
amazing.
shock. Yeah.
And that was with House Proud.
Yes, that was House Proud, a painting that was inspired by my mum. But I also, in the background, is an old Waiheke batch because I love the batches we have here that are all disappearing, as happens in these sort of communities. And people are building big flash beach houses, and the cute little batches are gone. So I thought I want to start putting some batches in my work. So that one's just down the road. But it was the figures in it are about um, sort of looking at motherhood and especially in my mother's era, the mum raised us on our own virtually, and we had virtually no money, but we were always neatly dressed. The house was always, and that was always mum's thing. And you never went out the door without everything looking tidy, or that kind of that emphasis. So I had this figure looking slightly downcast that I'd found on the internet, and I put with her a cluster of little girls who are like little chicks, because I'm one of 4 girls. So I wanted that idea of this mother and her children, and it looking beautiful, but also slightly, there's a slight dissonance there, I think is the word, yeah. That maybe all is not as it seems in that picture perfect world.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So when you think about your actual paintings, you use oils, but you also use cold wax.
I do. And I was inspired to use cold wax because I discovered a painter when I decided to focus more on my art, who was painting the kind of figures that I loved. They were semi-abstract women. I mainly paint women, and she uses cold wax, and she's one of the leading cold wax painters in the US. She's American. Her name's Melinda Kutsona, and she also teaches. So I enrolled during COVID, and my first class was her, which was called Abstracting the Figure, and I learned a lot about what to think about when you're trying to bring more abstraction into your work.
Can you tell us what kind of tips she had for abstracting the figure?
Well, it's about the composition, and not just having the figure in the middle of the canvas, for instance, and sometimes cropping them unusually. And some Melinda Kutsona and another painter, they're both from what's called the Bay Area School in California, and they were influenced by a well-known artist called Richard Diebenkorn, I think is how you pronounce it, and he was a master at that. His cropping was really interesting and intriguing, and colours and all that, and incorporating the background into the paintings more so that they're not separate. You work, when I did Melinda's courses, she said you work with the background all the way through. You don't just paint your figure and then, oh, what am I going to do in the background, which is what I used to do. And that was kind of like really enlightening, and things don't have to be representational, and most of her paintings they aren't, and I'm trying to get away from that too, and just bands of broad color. And maybe the good thing about using cold wax, which is what, as I said, Melinda does a lot, it creates sort of thick surface, and you can cut into it, you can scratch into it, and you can scrape it off, and so you get this sort of scumbling look. So you get lots of texture going on, and you can also, she talks about using transparent layers and then thicker layers, and varying those sorts of things as well. So it's actually, there's so many things that you can do to actually make it just so much more exciting and interesting, and bringing in colours from the background into the figure. I was always like, oh, I can't have green in my shadows, but lots of painters do. And she sort of encouraged that sort of thinking in your work, and I found it very freeing, I must admit. It was exciting. When I did my first course, I was just like, wow, I just love it. So I had to enroll in another one, and that was using cold wax particularly. So that was actually, because there are sort of technical things with cold wax, that just the tools you use, and so it looks a little bit like furniture polish, and you can mix it 50-50 or 20-40 or whatever. You can make what does she call them, like glaze, not glaze, but mostly not much color, and quite thin, or you can do it a little bit more pigment and that into your paint, depending on what you want to do.
And what sort of pigment are you putting into the wax?
Just oils. So
oil paint.
Yeah, you just oil paint. So I'll just, on my palette, just squeeze out the colours I want, mix the colour I want, and then I'll just put, usually 50-50 mostly, but I'm trying to mostly start with a thin layer with no wax, and then build to more waxed layers as the painting develops.
And is the wax in liquid form?
No, it's in like a furniture wax, like you'd buy something to wax a table. So it's a little tin like that, and you can get it from quite a few paint supply places now. Initially, I found it a little bit hard to source. I mean, there are lots and lots of people doing it in America. There's a Cold Wax Academy.
Mm.
I haven't really done any of their classes, but they look interesting. But mostly they're sort of purely abstract and not figurative. But that's why I liked her work so much, was the
Mm.
use of the figure.
And then once you've mixed the oil paint with the wax, then you blend it completely, right?
Yes, I really use the brush only for fine work, and I'm trying not to do too much fine work, although recently I have. But because that sort of makes it, you become more focused on the detail, which is not, really what it should be about for this style of painting. So you use what they call a squeegee, which is like a silicone um, tool, and you just dip it into the paint and then just spread it with the squeegee, and it's fun. And you can use other things. You can use a palette knife, and she encourages you to use as many tools to create the texture. So I press bubble wrap into it. Sometimes I'll get, hardware shops are really full of wonderful tools that you can use. Even I saw her once use the end of a broom, like one of those straw brooms, and she pressed it into the wax paint, and you just,
Amazing.
it's fun, yeah. So I must admit I've found it so enjoyable. So that's all I use now, and I think it's because it's low solvent. I don't feel like it's, if you were using terps or something, which is what I used to do. Even low solvent terps is still, it still seems to get into the atmosphere way more. But for some reason, when it's in the wax, it sort of encapsulates it more. So it's not so. I don't feel like I've got too much solvent around me.
Mm.
So
So is it, sorry, pardon my ignorance, I don't know much about cold wax or using cold wax with oil paints, but is it like adding a medium, like a molding paste of some sort
it
or
is.
a
Yes,
similar, and then it dries hard?
it dries hard. Eventually,
And so,
can take a little while to dry hard. So
yeah.
I can, if it's not a really hot day, it doesn't dry too quickly. And it means that then I can go back to it and think, oh, I'm going to scratch some flowers into that dress, or, things like that. Or you can even scrape it off and think, I don't like that. And you can reuse it somewhere else on the painting
Mm.
and add another
Amazing.
color over it. But it does make it dry quicker than just the oil and a salt, like terps or something.
Mm.
And so it means that you don't have to wait for ages for things to dry. So and I quite like it, sort of like a chalky finished texture on the painting. I don't know if you can see that on the one behind me, but yeah, that always, you end up with, it's almost a bit like tempura, but not. It's not as dry and chalky looking, but
Mm.
yeah, I like the
And then once
texture.
it's dry, you can put other layers of just oil paint over the top.
Well, I think that fat over thin rule still applies. Like I haven't really done that to any great extent. I've mainly, if I've got into the mostly cold wax, then I don't go back to thin paint, except for maybe the odd little detail or something.
Mm. And then are you actually using cold wax for the entire painting, including your figure?
Yes, I do. Yeah. So, and as I said to you, I try not to be too tight by using small brushes. So if I put it on the face, I'll try and use the squeegee or whatever, unless it's a small figure, a very small figure, or like the painting behind me. I wanted to get the details of her face correct, so I did use brushes for that. But I mean, you can, most painters do use both brushes and the squeegees.
Mm.
So it's
That's
yeah,
so interesting. That is
it's
really fascinating. Yeah, I really don't know very much about that. And you are bringing that, using that medium does bring something quite unique to your oil paintings.
Thank you. It does, and incorporating stencils into the mix. Sometimes, if I put too much wax in, I get this kind of ridged stenciled look, but it actually gives this lovely texture to it. So, I'm sort of embracing the journey. I probably should do more courses in it, like with this Cold Wax Academy or whatever. But I feel like I've got enough of a grasp of it that I can just carry on in my little way and adapt it to how I want, and it seems to work for the work that I want to do.
Yeah.
It's,
And it's almost
it's
like when you get some instruction, then that's enough for you then to kind of take it and get more experimental because you've got the basics rather
yeah,
than, starting from scratch and experimenting without any knowledge.
yes. Yeah, well, the reality is it's actually quite a simple thing to use. And I've talked to various artist friends here on the island and they said, oh, I'd love to learn more about that. And I said, oh, well, you teach me about printing and I'll teach you about cold wax.
Yeah.
I mean, they do suggest that you use a stable substrate. So I use ply panels, which Barry, my husband, will prep for me. He sands them and puts about 3 coats of white acrylic or something on them for me. Um, because if you use a lot of cold wax on a canvas and a canvas is slightly flexible, you might end up with some cracking. I haven't had that happen, but I think I don't want to risk that. So,
Mm. And I love the way you kind of touched on it before, but how you bring in that abstract background, and it's not necessarily a scene. It could just be kind of shapes and rectangles and
mm,
squares, and kind of you can see that the dragging of that tool in some paintings, and you really kind of explore mixing colors and combining colors in interesting ways. And I find that really beautiful, and it has a little bit of a cubist feeling because of the shapes, but then it just seems to complement the figure so beautifully.
yeah, I find it does. And that's why I think I was drawn to her work because like she's got these beautiful figures and most of them don't have faces. They're from the side or there's a suggestion of a face. And that's one of the things in the courses. She said she always leaves the face for last because she hates doing faces. But she said, just a suggestion is often enough. And she said, because you're either painting a portrait or you're not. And I thought, well, no, I'm not painting portraits anymore. I did it for years and I loved it, but it's so meticulous to get a likeness, and you spend hours and hours on the likeness, whereas just painting the figure and not worrying about the face, it's so much more freeing and
Yes.
enjoyable.
Yeah,
So
I can imagine. And
yeah.
the sometimes the faces are kind of partly obscured and sometimes they're sort of completely blanked out. How do you how do you actually manage the blanking of the face, and how do you decide how much you're going to obscure?
Well, it depends where the figure is and what I want to say about that figure. So if I feel a figure, I want a figure there, but I don't want the figure to be the main event. I'm actually painting much more with multiple figures, which was the third course I did with Melinda Kutsona, was a course on using multiples, and learned such a lot from that one as well. And the idea of having a figure perhaps in the background just to give a sense of mystery or proportion, that figure's down the beach sort of thing, or there's two figures. And I like the idea of mystery in my paintings. What is that person doing there? Why are they waiting, and who are they looking at there, and that sort of thing. And so those figures probably wouldn't have a face, and then the key figure, I might do some of a face, uh, or it might be just the light. If it's a big figure, I feel reluctant to just have a big blank face. So I will add more detail, suggestion of a face and stuff.
Mm.
But I really like figures from behind and walking and moving. I love trying to capture movement in my figures. And so for me, often someone walking down a beach from behind, and whether it's a woman or a man, but mostly in my case a woman, there's so much that they tell you about that person. Their hips slightly higher, or their shoulders slightly higher, or how they hold their hands. So for me, it's why not focus on that? I find that the most enjoyable thing.
Yeah, and
Is
that really comes across. I was absolutely captivated. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a painting of a woman who was with another woman, I think, and from behind, and she had her head tilted quite a bit, and I think she had a sort of scruffy bun,
I think I called
and
it barefoot. Yeah, I think.
okay, and it was just the most captivating painting. It was the way that you captured that pose was just
Thank you.
it really just drew me in. And so yeah, I feel like the pose for you is a huge part of what how you communicate, and is a big symbol, isn't it, really, in your paintings for you?
It is. It's what excites me the most. And if I find something, in fact, these two painters that I've just mentioned, Melinda and Linda Christensen, they will often reuse, which was a big breakthrough for me. They will reuse a pose, a photo, a particular pose that they like again and again in their paintings, but with different clothes and different. And it's like, yeah, because I want to be able to use that. Like there's one I painted and a friend bought it. It's two women and they're standing side by side in their swimming togs and they're looking down the beach at something. And they're both, and I called it curious, and they're both just looking, and there's nothing to see in my painting. I just painted their figures. But she said to me, the friend who bought it, I just love, and I love the name of it. And she loved the fact, because actually said it sort of drew her in as to ask all these questions. She said all her friends who see it think the same thing. And I think I'm going to do that again someday, that one.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good idea, holding on to some of those poses and using them again. I love that.
Well, I haven't
Yeah.
actually done it because I must admit I've got this huge bank of imagery that I find. I go on Pinterest a lot, or friends send me photographs. I have old photographs of my own, or whatever, that I will reuse and reuse. Adapt them for various poses, particularly of my children when they were small on the beach and things like that. I'm starting to paint a few more kid-related ones. I quite enjoy doing that.
Mm.
Yeah, because you can do little figures on little boards and panels, little cute kids. So I'm always down the beach, and my daughter says to me, "Mum, you're not supposed to photograph people on the beach." And I said, "Yeah, but they're not recognisable when I'm finished with them." So it's really just to get the pose, And the beach is a great place to see people lost in thought. They usually, you can just tell they're contemplating, they're looking in the distance, or they've got their head down, as you said, and the groupings of the people. Sometimes there'll be a little family, the kids in the water, there'll be a grandma, might be a father, and it's like, oh, that's a gorgeous little family, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
love
so
that.
I think
And
we're quite uninhibited when we're on the beach.
yes, yeah. And you're kind of telling a story or capturing a story, but then also allowing the audience or the viewer to create their own story, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And just back to the garden design side of things, the gardens that you introduce into some of your paintings. Do you see it as a part of your garden design brain that you're actually really kind of structuring an interesting garden with plants? Because I feel like that could become more of a focus for you as well, couldn't it?
Well, funny you should say that, because I paint the painting I mentioned earlier of the garden safari. One of the figures in the painting, the central figure, I didn't know who she was, but I happened to be going to a dance class on the island for super groovers. It's good fun. And this woman was in the class, and I thought, she's in my painting. So I had to introduce myself to her. And I said, I think you're in my painting. And she said, oh, show me. So I showed her. I hadn't quite finished it. And she said, oh, that's lovely. Oh, I might look buy that. But in the end, I submitted it in the Walker and Hall and got in the finals, and one of the Walker and Hall family actually bought it, so that was great. But the woman, Ingrid, said to me later, well, I'd like you to paint something for me in a garden setting. And I said, well, what sort of gardens do you like? And she told me she liked formal. So that was such a fun painting to do. So I used the same shot that I'd taken of her, but in a totally different context, walking through a formal garden. And it was because I did used to, when I was a garden designer, I used to do perspective drawings, and I would often take a photograph of someone's garden and then draw over it and show them how it could look. And I used to do that in the magazine as well. Give people send in photographs, and I'd choose one each month. And I really enjoyed that process. So it was a little bit like taking that work and putting it into my painting. So I am quite keen to maybe pursue that little, perhaps I should offer that as one of my
Yes, I think you should. I think it's something really unique that you can bring to your work.
well, we all love, us gardeners, we love our gardens, don't we? We garden.
Hmm.
And so,
Yes.
yeah, it could be something that might interest other people. Yeah, I'll look at that one. It's fun
Yeah,
to
and
do, that's for sure.
yeah, and it's so beautiful that you actually, even though you became one of the academic, or you were one of the academic kids and not one of the arty kids at high school, that you did explore a career that actually had a real creative side, didn't it? And it's now informing your art practice.
It did, because partly through my journalist career, I decided to study landscape design at Unitec because I was writing about it and I just became so intrigued and interested. And partly during that course, one of the things we had to do was draw in a day book every day. We were taught by this lovely artist, Hamish Foote, and that just really and sort of almost regenerated all my enthusiasm for art. And some friends who are both artists and art teachers, one of them, they saw it. They were people that we sailed with for years and years, my husband and I and our families together. And they said, oh, you should do more of this, Karen. You should be doing some painting. So I started painting with Sue, the art teacher, in the weekends. So that kind of did my landscape studies started pushing me towards back into art. So it was full circle. So yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And as somebody who's had a career that's been sort of backed by education and, you know, was seen as a valid career, which not sometimes artist careers aren't seen in that way by some people. And the fact that you are basically fundamentally self-taught, even though you've done these amazing courses as well. How does that feel for you? How do you feel about your life now as an artist?
Well, you do still when you're self-taught, you have that ever-present imposter syndrome going on. But I must admit, in the things that have happened recently, the winning that runner-up award and the Walker and Hall, I think it's gradually made me more confident and feeling that I can say that word, artist. And my husband built a little studio out in the garden, and I'm in there, almost every day during the winter, not so much in the summer because it's a bit hot out there. But I do feel belonging to the Waiheke Art Gallery. I joined that not long after moving here, and they have a members show every year. So that was, one of my first attempts to exhibit. And that, because that is one of the scary things, is putting your work out there. And they sold, and most of the work that I've put in the gallery has sold in the various exhibitions. So that encouraged me. And then after the award, I was approached by another gallery, a gallery in Palmerston North, Zimmerman Gallery, and being approached by a gallery, because I was never brave enough to go to another gallery, but she did. She approached me. She liked my work. She loved the painting that won the award, and so that sort of made me feel like really validated. So at the moment, I feel quite happy with where I'm going with my work, and I'm excited about the next paintings that I'm sort of focusing on. I've got a kind of a focus on more using older photo references and older, sort of looking at nostalgia and old family photographs, just looking at the past. And so that's what I want to continue in my next series, really, is reworking those. And it's always still about the figure. But I think part of my obsession with this was when I was a child, my mother had a photograph of her mother who died when Mum was young, Emily Jane, and she was a young woman sitting in this chair, and she just looked beautiful. And I used to look at it all the time and think, God, you're beautiful. And I've often thought about painting Emily Jane in another context. So I started digging out old family photographs and playing with them, and I really liked again with the cold wax, but in that sort of slightly abstract way I've done it. And then I discovered some more painters who were doing that. And so that kind of got me even more excited. One is called Amy Jury. She's a fantastic English painter, and she just paints really crazy colours and all that, but using old imagery. And another American painter called Amy Brake Liversley, I think how you pronounce it, Amy Brakeman Liversley. And she lives in Montana, and she uses very old photographic references and materials that she must find at farm sales or whatever, and so she collages and uses those in her paintings, and they're sort of got that narrative, but they're in a lovely abstract way. So that's kind of my latest passion at the moment. And
I feel like you've just got like 3 lifetimes worth of, inspiration from where you live and from your stories of your life, and then all the people in your life, and then what you see around you. But also with your techniques and yeah, it feels like you've just got so much material ready to go and, so much inspiration.
I do. I have a lot of inspiration. It's the time, really.
That's
and
so good.
But it is good. It's so exciting, and I never stop thinking about it. I go to bed, and it's a mistake. I go to bed and start thinking about art, and you're going to be awake at 2 in the morning still thinking about that particular painting.
Yes, I know that feeling well. And are
Yeah.
you thinking about maybe approaching other galleries now that you've had that sort of affirmation?
Um, I'm still not sure about that one, but I might. I'll work on a few more paintings because I sort of haven't really got much to show anyone else. I'm sort of quite happy. I've sold about three in the last show at the Waiheke Gallery, which was really encouraging. So that was a small show called Jostle, which they do every couple of years, and I was thrilled that three sold in that.
Mm.
So I think I want to sit down and work on this next series, this continuation of the looking at the past and why do we look at the past, and is it because of the current tough times that we're living in, and is the past really better? Sort of trying to ask some of those questions through my paintings,
Mm.
using some of my old family photos, but others that I've found, and one a friend gave me of her sister, and it's just such a lovely painting. This little girl, and back in the day, and so I'm going to rework that one, and yeah, so I think I'll see where it leads me, and if I feel happy enough with it, I might.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think it was Katie Lee Stewart who I spoke to the end of last year. And she actually put a call out on Instagram for people to send in photos of, that they felt would be a good starting point for her paintings. So that could be quite an interesting project just to kind of put it out there for people to n notice, certain poses or, have some sort of little focus for people to think about and then send you photos which you might not use, but, could
Yeah.
lead to something quite interesting.
Yeah, so that could definitely be. I mean, there is a wealth of material on sites like Pinterest and Flickr and things like that. But I must admit, I like there to be a personal connection if I can, or, some rather than just being some random person that I've discovered, although sometimes they're just so cute. Americans seem to love to post all these pictures of their old family photos, and some of them I just can't resist. I'm thinking, I've got to turn that into painting. It's just so weird and wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
you have touched on your process, but I read that you use a computer sometimes.
Yes, I do. That's the other thing that I came across when I did my first course with Melinda Kutsona, was an app called Procreate, and you have it on an iPad mostly or something like that, and I guess it's an easier version of something like Photoshop. So you can put a photo directly into Procreate, and then you can paint over it with an iPencil, and it's a really good tool at every stage of painting. So if you say you've done a sketch, you could put the sketch in and then colour it up. So it's really good for working out your initial colour palettes. It's really good for your composition because you can crop and think, okay, well, I want that smaller, or I want that square, or whatever, change figures around. And then once you're sort of halfway through a painting, if you're not sure about a colour, you can put it into Procreate and think, because I've done it so many times with my skies, for instance. I think, well, I want a pink sky. Do I want a yellow sky? Do I want a blue sky? And I've done all these different coloured skies. And then eventually I think, yes, no, I want that colour sky. So it's a great tool, because otherwise trying to do it all on the panel or the canvas, you waste so much paint, and it's also work and takes so much time, whereas this just cuts out a lot of that. And some of them are actually quite fun to actually keep. I actually sold a few during my exhibition at the gallery of just some digital prints that I did, because what I find is that I actually go a little bit more experimental and a little bit more adventurous when I'm using, because it's not like, oh, I don't have to take that paint off. I can just, press the little key and it'll go. It actually makes you a little bit more sort of prepared to sort of outside your comfort zone a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's great, great tool. I highly recommend it for artists. It's
I love
easy to
that.
use. I haven't explored all the things you can do on it, but if you're really techie savvy, you'd probably find it's a marvelous tool. I think animators use it a lot.
Mm.
Procreate.
That is such a good tool. And speaking of experimenting, I have seen a lino cut that you made, I think with a friend, which I loved. How experimental are you, and do you like learning new techniques, or do you kind of have a play with the paintings that you're working on and try different things?
I haven't done much in that area at all, and that was my art teacher friend Sue. We had a weekend away, and she taught me. We did lino cut work together, and that's based on a drawing I did of my daughter years ago, and I was just thrilled with it. So she keeps talking about coming to the island, and we'll have another go at that. And then I've got another lovely friend on the island, Paul Dashwood, who's built his own printing press, and he does marvelous things with all sorts of different printing techniques, and he keeps saying I can come along and have a session with him. So that's also on my agenda.
You just don't have enough time. You've got so much to
No.
do.
I've
Yeah.
always loved print. I love artists who use printing. I don't know if you know Margaret Preston, the Australian painter. She painted lots of flowers, but she did lots of like woodcuts based on sort of Japanese, quite style, and they're beautiful. So that's something perhaps in the future that I might get into, because I think the effect is really lovely.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I just feel like the world's your oyster, as I said. And so, how do you balance intuition with planning in your creative process?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I actually do try and trust my intuition. But I do realize that planning does sometimes take the frustration out of what you're doing. If you've put that figure there and you've put a lot of work into that figure, then having to sort of completely delete that, which I have done, and I know some of the painters I admire, these two Californian women, that's what they do. They'll just completely take a figure out if it's in the wrong spot, and I'm thinking, God, that's so courageous. And you don't want to get caught with something that you're not particularly happy with, so you do need to be prepared to um, to make those sort of decisions. But if you can do a little bit of, which I think the Procreate process, and I do a lot of sketching. I sketch and sketch until I feel happy that it's something, and then I start playing and Procreate with it. Because I've always loved sketching anyway and drawing, so it's nothing's lost. And then you've got all those sketches if you want to use them for other work further down the track. So I try and keep most of them if I can.
Mm.
And
So
so for me, it's sort of like a 50-50 balancing act. And I know that's one thing Melinda Kutsona would say. She'd say, let accidents happen. That's often when you get the best work. So I'm trying to be open to that. If I do kind of end up with a colour that I hadn't thought I would use, actually sometimes it works, and you never would have thought. I did a painting of a beach scene in Onitangi, and these young girls walking along the beach, and I had an orange on my palette that I must have just decided to put on this panel, and I ended up painting these girls, trying to get the patterns in the sand, which you will relate to, Mandy. And I ended up with sort of oranges and jades and pinks, and I'm like, oh, that's not really what sand is about, but it actually looked cool, so I went with it, and I sold it immediately. So I was very pleased with that.
I
So
know the painting you're talking about. That's also amazing. Yeah. And you
yeah.
spoke about sometimes in summer working in one of your rooms in the house because the studio is too warm. I'm just intrigued to know if you find your work changing at all when you change your space, and how your actual creative space affects what you make.
Well, I must admit, if I would love it in an ideal world to be able to just be in the same space and decorate it and all that kind of stuff. Like your studio is, it's beautiful. Mine all has to be taken down because we have an overseas daughter and we have a daughter in town, and we want a private space for them in the garden in the summer. And as I said, it is quite hot there too. So in a way, it doesn't quite have the intimacy in my studio that I think I would like. But when I started painting, I painted on the kitchen table for years. I've painted in the, corners of the house. I've drawn and painted on the boat, in the cockpit, down below when it's rough. I've sort of had to learn to do it wherever I can, whenever I can. So in a way, I don't think it affects anything too majorly. I think mostly once I get in the flow, I'm oblivious to what's going on around me. And I might use the inside room as more planning. It depends, on the timing and all that kind of stuff. But then, like at the moment I'm planning, and I know once I move back into my studio, I'll be ready to go with hopefully 6 paintings, working together on all of them and trying to get, that's another thing that these painters that I've studied have encouraged. And I do think that's a really good thing to do. Then when you've got leftover paint, you can throw it on another board if you want to. You can see how the colours are all working together, and if one's, you want to leave one because it's not working that well, you just put that one aside and go to another one, think, well, I'll just do the and on that one now, So it's actually a really good way to work if you've got the space. And my studio is not huge, so 6 panels sometimes can be a bit of a squeeze. But
That's so true about having more than one piece available. And I find too that it makes you really sort of focus on your process instead of thinking about the final product with that one work.
yeah,
That you
yes.
can kind of just keep moving within your process rather than thinking I have to finish this to that sort of final product stage in a
And
way.
sometimes really exciting things come out of it. There's one I completed recently, which I called Into the Woods, and that was a painting that I hadn't liked or sold. So I used some leftover colours on it. Then I started playing with some stencils on it, and then finally I thought, oh, I could put a figure in there. And I had this image from years ago that I cut out of a magazine of a figure that I like. So I painted her in, and then I drew some trees and things because I always loved drawing and loved drawing trees. So I thought I'm going to put a tree in there, and you can use this. It's called China marker. You can use that over oils. I don't know if you know about those, but
No.
there's not so many available in New Zealand. But this painter Melinda Kutsona uses them a lot, and so the final painting, I just loved all the layers on it, and it was completely all virtually accidental, just from bits that I'd been working on other paintings. And so yeah, it is definitely worth doing, having other ones. And I hate wasting paint, so I love to put it on another panel somewhere.
Such a good idea. How do you run your week, and do you have any particular rituals that help you to keep disciplined?
My week can change from week to week depending on, because living on Waiheke we have lots of visitors. I've had some from overseas visiting last week, so I'm doing the tour guide duties. So for me, I just look at my week planner and think, well, okay, that day I can have an afternoon in my studio, and I'm trying to learn to be more disciplined and say to people, I'm in my studio that day. And people don't always listen. They wander up the garden, because people just drop in on Waiheke. They wander up the path, and I'm in my studio. But usually if I just stay there now, I don't come in and make them a cup of tea. I just stay in the studio, and you can talk to me in my studio while I'm working. So yeah, I try and at least find a day or 2 days a week where I can just focus on my art, whether it's just doing some sketching or whatever. Sometimes more. It depends on, as I said. I find once the summer's over and there's less visitors, then it's like, phew, they're all gone.
Yeah.
I can just focus on what I
A
want.
lot of, yeah, a lot of artists say that I don't think sometimes friends don't really understand that you're actually working.
No, I think you're playing.
Yeah. What a life. And is there anything you struggle with in your practice that people might not expect?
I still feel that composition is a challenge, because not having done any formal art training, learning about composition was a real eye opener for me, and I'm still learning. So sometimes I look at something and I think, you haven't got the composition right, and what do I do to fix that? And I know now that probably you should start again, and most often I do, but sometimes I've virtually completed a painting and I think, like the one behind me, and I think, I'm not super happy with that one, but I'm just going to leave it and let it rest and see. And if it sits there and I don't try and exhibit it or whatever, I'll know that it's time to change it. So it's learning to trust my instincts, I guess, which you don't know, how good your instincts are if you've not really, trained as an artist, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to trust them more and more. I mean, I get lots of comments about my use of color, but the other aspects, which I think are really important if you're going to have an interesting painting, because figurative art, let's face it, not everyone wants a figure on their walls. They want something that's not challenging, and people see figures as quite challenging. So the goal is to not make it something that's people are going to feel like that. I don't want to paint for other people, but I also want my work to be approachable and for people to feel comfortable with it. So that's a real balancing act too, is because I did used to paint, portraits a lot, and I know some people love portraits if it's their family or whatever. I painted, one of my first courses I did was with Zaran Southern, and we did a whole term on painting the one figure, and it was just his face. And that was really challenging and interesting. And I still admire very deeply people who do paint beautiful portraits.
Mm. And that, I guess that's the thing about your obscured faces too. For some people who might have a little bit of, might not be sure that portraits are for them or figurative
Yes.
works are for them, then that's kind of making them think, oh, okay, it's not an actual person who I don't know,
Yes.
or they can bring something of their own to that person, or yeah, it maybe it helps some people who are not so open to that kind of work.
I think so. And also for me, it also, doing that first course with, learning how to abstract the figure, for me, it also opened my eyes to an interest in abstraction. And so I try to make my work not just about the figure. I want the background and the surroundings to be as interesting as the figure, whereas in the past it was just the figure.
Mm.
It's an afterthought, but now, it's actually, that's part of the real challenge for me, is learning how to bring those elements of abstraction into a figure painting and make them cohesive and tell a good story together. And sometimes I get it right.
Yeah, you get it right a lot of times, I would say. And also just that combination of sort of abstract and less abstract, or even abstract and almost, really quite realistic. You are playing with those
Yes,
tensions, which I think is really interesting.
it is. And I find myself veering sometimes into, more realist depiction of a figure. And I'm thinking, no, do I really want to do that? But sometimes I can't help myself, and so I've learned, well, if this is what you really feel strongly about, you've got to let that happen. So I do, and just trust that people will be. But it's actually interesting, going back to talking about the old photographs and things. There is so much you can do without actually doing a completely representational, um, you know, version of say an old painting. One of the first ones I did was for a friend here, and she had a lovely old photograph of her parents, and she wanted it. I'd already painted a picture of her on the beach, and she liked all the colours. She said, "Can you do that painting for me in your colours?" And an old painting, an old photograph, because I use a lot of colours like turquoises and aquas and those sorts of colours and blues, and so applying that sort of colour palette to an old photograph was quite a challenge. But I realised that you can still manage to get the feeling of that old photograph, or, as I said, figures and whatever, no matter what colours you use, if you're clever and you just think about it. There's one artist that I mentioned earlier, Amy Jury, but most of her figures are painted pink. The faces are pink, or they're orange, or they're yellow, or something. And I'm thinking, but that she's so daring with it. I guess I'd like to be more daring. That's one of my challenges.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's that sort of balancing act between abstraction and semi-abstraction. And for me, if you have a figure in there, uh, you know, unless you're Picasso or something, I'm not. I haven't ever been felt inclined to do, to work much more abstractly with figures as some artists do, and completely make them, almost devoid of features and things like that. I love that. I love still conveying that lift of a hip or that, turn of a head or something. So I feel that the surroundings should also have some abstraction but not go too far, because the two would be out of sync. So it's trying to keep those two working together, and sometimes I look at it and no, you've gone a little bit too realist here, Carol, so pull that back, or whatever, and keeping your background not too representational helps that. And to me, it just adds excitement and interest. And I guess, just gives it that more contemporary feel. And that layered look, I think that's a big part of it too, putting down different layers, whether it's stencils or I'm starting to play a little bit with collage. I haven't done much, but I quite like to do a bit more on that too. So I think that actually adds another interesting layer to work. So, and text, as I mentioned to you earlier, a friend said to me, "You're a journalist, Carol. You should be using some text in your paintings." And I'm still a bit loath to do it because I think it does require a special skill, but that's something I'm sort of starting to play a little bit with, and hopefully.
And it would be amazing if you could find a course that sort of explores text. That would be really interesting, I think.
Well, a lot of this work in the courses I've done is you build up the background first and then you put the figure in. And so sometimes, and I've seen some abstract artists do it too, is you just can write on your panel or and whatever you want to write, some pieces of poetry or just someone's name or a date or something, and you can cover it but leave it partly revealed. So that's kind of how I feel I might work towards in some of my next paintings, is put some text references in there, and but just allude to them as to making them, rather than making them overt, like say is it Nigel Brown? He used to do those sort of postcard paintings, which I love. But I don't think that's quite where I'm heading. So it's a way, subtly. Because text is beautiful, and there's some lovely things you can do with it. I've always loved text. I used to love playing with different, fonts and drawing, different words and different sort of styles and that when I was a kid. So I think, come on, Carol, you can have a go too.
Yeah, I feel like that could come, and you could do something interesting with text into the wax, I imagine.
Yes, I think you could. You could, as I said, you can find various tools and write into it.
Or a little like letter stamps, or could you do that?
Idea, yeah. Or just even just like a skewer or something. You could, that lovely font that we were talking about, that old sort of script style, which I was taught when I was at primary school. You could actually do a lovely big beautiful set of letters, and that flowing through the background of that's Mandy. That might go in my next painting.
Oh my God. I think I need to start doing that. I feel so motivated just listening to you. But then text is another way of telling a story, or connecting to a certain time, or connecting to a certain person. And just very briefly, why do you think you like to paint women?
I call myself a feminist. I was very interested in feminism from my university days, and a lot of the authors I read, Simone de Beauvoir, and most of the writers I seem to be drawn to were women. And I just find the female figure, there's so much more poignancy and of course grace and all those qualities. But I do feel that women have had a rough time of it, and when I think of my mum and other women of her generation, and even when I was growing up, that women get on with it, and they are stoic and strong, and they still find time to create and be mothers and be, we're so multifaceted. There's so much to admire about women. I don't dislike men by any means, but I just find there's more stories to women that, just by looking at a woman, often there's a story there, just the way she's sitting, holding her shoulders, or whatever. So Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
What would you say to your younger artistic self?
I'd say don't listen to those teachers. And if you're interested in art, go for it as soon as you can, because it's so uplifting and so enriching to be in your life, and you don't have to make it your main breadwinner. Of course, but I think if you stifle creativity, it's not healthy. So I don't necessarily think I stifled it. I turned it into other directions, but I like to think that if I had been able to maybe explore that side of me from a younger age, I might have perhaps been a happier person when I was younger. I think I was, had a few issues with the family breakup, etc., etc. And art has always been, I used to envy my sister who played the guitar, and I'd look at her and I think, when times are tough, Kate just sits there and plays the guitar. That's so great. That's so cool to have that. And I probably could have been doing that too, but I didn't really realise, because I sort of wasn't encouraged. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it's definitely good for well-being, isn't it? But then I wonder what your paintings would have been like if you'd gone straight into studying art and being an artist from a young age. I wonder how different your paintings would be now.
yeah, they probably would have been. It'd be interesting to know.
We'll never know, will we? You have spoken about a few artists who I'm sure some of the listeners will go away and look up. But what or who inspires your work?
Well, the one I mentioned, Melinda Kutsona, and um, she's a friend of hers, and she's also in this Bay Area, Linda Christensen. Those two I really admire. But one of the first artists that, when you talked of Cubism, was Tamara de Lempicka. I discovered her, and I first saw an artist painting people, but not in a realist way, in a sort of slightly cubist way. And so I fell in love with her, and she was a woman ahead of her time. Have you heard of her? Polish
No,
artist.
no.
And she painted a lot of society portraits, but she also did like a self-portrait of herself driving this car, and she was this, and this is the 30s. And so I really admired her. But I admired, I love Jacqueline Fay's work too. I love the fact that she introduced the domestic into her painting so much, and made it, a key theme, and um, the madness of it, and trying to be an artist surrounded by domesticity and children, and all that. I kind of, that resonated with me, because that's what kind of how I was for many years. So yeah, I
Mm,
think those are some of my main influences, mostly women, of course.
yeah. Do you ever paint yourself or sort of include yourself in some of these paintings?
I did. There's a painting me. I think it's on my Instagram page, that I painted of myself when I was living in London, and I'm sitting on the phone, and a photographer friend took the shot, and it was black and white, and it was when I first started experimenting with Melinda Kutsona's courses and things, and using cold wax, and I love that painting. I've got it hanging in my house now, and I there was a lovely old sofa that we used to have. Well, it wasn't. It was actually a horrible old sofa, but it had these stripes on it, and so I was able to put the stripes in with my cold wax, and she had my dress was sort of slightly shiny 60s, because I used to obviously get them from op shops and things over there, and I was able to get with the cold wax the textures of this fabric. So that was one of the few self-portraits I've ever done. Most I have tried doing the odd drawing and shown it to people, and they go, "Who's that?" They don't recognise me in it. I might do another one day, but I'm mostly like drawing other people.
Yeah, and at least you can actually pop yourself in there and nobody will know and just obscure your face and you
That's
know.
true. I do put my daughters and various other people into the paintings every now and again. If I feel it needs another figure, I think, oh, where's that drawing of Miranda? That'll work, and so forth. In the
That's
back.
so good.
I think
Amazing.
my daughters a lot, to be honest.
You've come from a family of girls, you have daughters. So,
Yeah.
that female influence is really sort of in there, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it is, I guess.
So what's next for you, Carol Bucknell?
Well, this year there's a members show that I want one of my next pieces to go in. There's also, we're having open studios on Waiheke, and for the first time they used to have them, and they'd started them up again last year, but I wasn't able to do that weekend. It's always on King's birthday weekend. So this year I'm trying to get some work together for that and open my studio and maybe have the odd friend share my studio so that I'm not too nervous. And this gallery that approached me from Palmerston North, the Zimmerman Gallery, I might try and do some work for that, for perhaps a group show or even maybe a solo show. That's something too scary to contemplate, but that would be
amazing.
an exciting thing to do.
Yeah.
Those are on my wish list for 2026, Mandy.
That's so good. Oh my gosh, I just find you so inspiring. And
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
you've got an incredible practice. And I feel like, well, you've got hopefully 30 more years to sort of really expand on what you're doing, because I feel like there's so many ideas in your head.
I do have a lot of ideas in my head.
Yeah.
My husband's like, "What are you doing?" And he thinks I'm just on social media, and I'm saying, "I'm watching art porn. I just love going onto Instagram and looking at what artists are doing, and I think, oh, that looks good. That looks exciting." So
Yeah, so
lots
much
of art
inspiration.
that's all I can wish for in the future is lots of art
Yes,
and the
that's
house
so
to do
good.
it all and do it
Yeah.
well.
Oh, well, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mandy. It's been enjoyable. Not as scary as I thought it would be.
That's good.
You're a great host.
Thank you.